On September 24th, CBS premiered the first 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. I know a lot of you have been waiting for the Midnight's Edge Star Trek Discovery pilot review. The wait is over. Today, I am joined by Rob Gallo, Midnight's Edge Narrator Supreme.
Hey everybody.
And Tom of Midnight's Edge After Dark fame.
Thank you for having me.
In this roundtable, which will be heavy on spoilers, so you have been warned, we will first let you know our expectations going in, followed by our overall impression before digging into visuals, characters, and story. Then we'll talk about what milestones the series needs to hit in order to be considered a success, what we expect will happen in the rest of the season, and finally, discuss if this really is Star Trek, or if the Orville now holds that honor. Let's begin with what we expected going into the series. Tom, let's begin with you.
I was expecting that it would probably be very visually stunning because they obviously spent a lot of money on the special effects. Didn't expect much out of the story, though. I didn't really expect to like it, considering all that we've heard and gone through and reported. So I was trying to be as neutral as possible, and I think I succeeded in that point, but as we were ramping up to it, I just kept trying to say, look, it could be great. I even said it to Rob a few times on the After Dark podcast. I was like, it could be great, it could be amazing. We'll just have to wait and see. That's about how I tried to go into it. Rob?
I tried to hold out hope that it would somehow be good, but knowing what we've known at Midnight's Edge, that made it more difficult. I will have to preface my remarks with that. But at the same time, there was that little thing in the back of my brain saying, okay, you have to give it a chance. You have to give it a chance. You have to give it a chance. You could be wrong. You know, I kept saying, okay, I could be wrong about this. I could be wrong about this. I have to try to be at least open-minded. I didn't know what to really expect from the story. I expected the visuals to be top tier, you know, but I really had no idea in terms of where to set the bar, in other words, for the whole thing. There's a certain expectation that, well, is this going to be like the other Star Treks? And you're always going to think about it in terms of the other series, too, at the same time. Yeah, like I said, you tried to form an objective opinion, and that's all I really could do going into this.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and I've been struggling with that myself. Contrary to what some out there may believe, none of us actually want Discovery to fail. We're covering the troubled production that it has been behind the scenes, but that doesn't mean we want it to fail. On the contrary, as a Star Trek fan, I want it to succeed. So there is that thing, but at the same time, we have been covering the production trouble. We know what went on behind the scenes, and it wasn't pretty. And that kind of like does color the expectations when we know what's been going on and what a warped perception some of the key decision makers have of Star Trek. And how is that going to come off on screen? Now, of course, there have been examples of deeply troubled productions that still have made it work. A famous example is RoboCop, which was a legendarily troubled production, but still the end result ended up working on screen. There was always the hope that this could be the same thing here. I had no doubt that visually it would, if not Star Trek, at least look appealing and stunning in some sense. But story-wise, I was a little bit more concerned. So I must admit, in the name of honesty, that I went in probably not entirely neutral, not hoping for it to fail, but certainly expecting the worst, I would say. Another thing that really lowered my expectations going in was the embargo on reviews right up until the moment the series opens, because that is a telltale sign that they are not confident in their product and how it's going to be received at all. For instance, in Star Trek 2009, the feature film by J.J. Abrams, they weren't worried at all. They knew they had a hit at their hands, so they showed it months before the opening, and they just gave embargoes in the sense that people could tweet their opinions, but ideally not share any major spoilers. Which they by and large stuck to. Of course, details leaked much earlier, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, going back to Star Trek Discovery, the lead into that was much more similar to the lead into both Batman v Superman and the Green Lantern, because in those movies, reviews were also embargoed right up until the premiere. Instead of reviews in advance, you got tweets in advance from some very controlled audiences who went to screenings, who then just raved about the movie. That happened with Star Trek Discovery too. There was a screening for some select fans and for previous Star Trek alum earlier in the week, and they of course tweeted their opinions, all praising it. Just like what happened with Green Lantern and Batman v Superman, which to me is usually a red flag, which indicates that, oh, they haven't really got faith in their product. You even have like some cast members who go out and say that, yeah, we're going to say anything. We don't have to see it to praise it.
When I watched Generations, I was in New York with Patrick. So anyway, so we're both in New York, and Patrick is the kind of actor who is, you know, he's the right kind of actor who basically says, I won't talk to the press until I've seen the movie. The rest of us are like, we don't need to see the movie. We're going to say it's fabulous, even about insurrection. Do you know what I mean? I mean, we're like...
So now that we've covered our expectations going in, what is your overall impression of the 2 episodes that we've seen so far? Tom?
I didn't like it. I didn't really care for it. I pretty much come out of it feeling like I was expecting to, and that was, yeah, it would have been cool as any other sci-fi show or sci-fi story, but outside of a few sound effects and insignias, it's not very Star Trek. The acting is atrocious. The story was subpar at best, very cookie cutter and straightforward, didn't really bring anything new to the table, and unless they take a major turn here soon, I'm not even sure if I'm really into most of these characters. Doug Jones's character was the only one that I was even remotely invested in through the entire show. Rob?
Oh boy, where do I begin? I sat down to watch this. It was delayed because the football game here on the East Coast had run long, so I sat down saying, okay, this is the moment of truth. And after 10 minutes, I had felt like I'd been sitting there for an hour. It was like you had taken something that could be really good and deliberetely tried as hard as you could to make it bad. Which is weird. And I found it was just a great source of frustration for me. It really was, because I love Star Trek. I love everything about Star Trek. I've loved Star Trek since I was a little kid. And I was screaming at the television, this is bullshit! I can't believe they're doing this. Every character was an idiot. There was overstuffed visuals. Every single second on screen was crammed with as much visual information as they could possibly squeeze into the frame. And I'm like, would you just let it breathe for a second? The story was contrived. And as I said, nothing seemed to make sense from a logical standpoint. I'll give you an example. Okay, guys, ready?
Yeah.
The beginning. Yeah, go for it.
The beginning. The satellite that was destroyed. It had a gigantic hole in it, which was charred around the edges, right? Which was, it was obvious burn marks. And they were sitting at each other. Hey, guys, what do you think caused this? What the fuck do you think caused it? Somebody shot at it! I can't believe how stupid can you be in the writing room. It's unbelievable. And Michael Burnham's, oh yeah, hey, I'm just going to go take a spacesuit and I'm going to go for a spacewalk, even though the radiation can kill me.
In 20 minutes.
In 20 minutes? What the fuck? A 5-year-old could come up with a better plot than this. Typical Star Trek is you take a shuttle if it's too dangerous, or you send a probe out. And remember they said they were throwing away the legacy of all the previous Treks? Yeah, they just threw it away. They just threw it right in the trash. And I was not invested in any of the characters. I was frustrated more than anything, which made part 2 say, you know what? I don't give a shit. Kill these motherfuckers. I don't give a shit.
So, Rob, what did you think of the new Star Trek show?
Well, you mean the Orville?
Oh, man. No, it was. It was like all the people's dialogue was like they were reading IKEA instructions.
The most stiff wooden dialogue ever. Nobody spoke like a real person at all. None of the dialogue sounded like it would be spoken by an actual living person.
Right.
It all was it sounded like they were reading out of a tech manual, and actually a lot of dialogue sounded like it wasn't being acted. It sounded like it was being read. It was poorly acted, poorly read. And what was up with those stupid Batman 60s television series camera angles? Every shot was on a tilted angle.
Right. And there was more lens flare than any of the J.J. Abrams films.
I don't wear sunglasses. So much lens flare. Are you kidding me? Jesus. Oh.
And Sonequa Martin was always posing. Did you notice that
Yes.
too? She was constantly in some strange pose. It was distracting. Yeah.
I'm looking dignified. Look at me.
Again, just like in the 60s Batman TV series with the tilted angles and the posing, even though, of course, this is a reference to the J.J. Abrams movies, which also had the tilted angles in scenes of action. But only in scenes of action. Here, it was all the frickin' time. But anyway, my overall impression is that this was pretty underwhelming, I have to say. The visuals were technically very well made, but what held them back were two things for me. One, they didn't look like Star Trek. Two, they were over-designed and looked ugly. Like, for instance, the Klingons. Not for 1 second did I accept a single one of them as a Klingon.
And
We
you know-
know what the Klingons looked like in this period, and that wasn't it. And the uniforms were over-designed, especially the warp traveling effect. That's the worst warp traveling effect to this day. But for all the work they did on the designs, they certainly didn't do enough with the story. Because I gotta say, we have now seen 2 episodes worth of Star Trek. That's like the ordinary thing for a Star Trek pilot is 2 episodes. Of course, usually it's a double episode spliced together instead of 2 separate ones in continuation, but you've had the same since the Next Generation up until Enterprise. The only pilot which was a single episode was the pilot for the original series, which incidentally remains my favorite Star Trek pilot to this day. My least favorite Star Trek pilot was, up until this moment, the pilot for Voyager. But the pilot for Discovery just supplanted it as my least favorite because that was pretty paper thin. There really was so little going on if you compare that pilot with all the other past Star Trek pilots. How do you guys think this pilot compares with the previous Star Trek pilots?
Well, this one by far is my least favorite. And my favorite one would probably be the original Trek. I think it's Where No Man's Gone Before.
Where No Man Has Gone Before, the second pilot, original 1966 series. This was just a paper-thin premise, just slapped onto like a cocktail napkin, and they just threw a bunch of effects behind it. So, oh yeah, let's have the Klingons show up, and they'll start shooting. All right, there's our pilot, guys.
Let's dig into some more detail of the pilot episode and begin with the visuals.
Well, to me, the Klingons, they're very ornate, very detailed, but total and complete overkill. They overdid it so badly. For any other series, this would have been probably good, but at the same time, you had a hard time selling me that these were the Klingons, really. They kept saying these are the Klingons, but in the back of my brain, there was that little light going off. These aren't the Klingons, or at least not the ones that I know.
Well, they were wearing Stargate dresses, for one.
They all talked like they had a mouthful of sandwich or something. I don't know what was going on there. I'm pretty sure that there are some people that are going to say these were bold design decisions, but just a lot of things just didn't make a lot of sense. There were just a lot of things like the sarcophagus ship with all the bodies on the outside. That really seemed to serve no purpose until the end, where they had to come up with a way to sort of sew this all together. Really, the design of the whole thing, I mean, yeah, it looks impressive, but at the same time, it was just, like I said before, crammed full of so much visual information that I honestly started to get a headache watching this thing. Like I said, you're just like, slow down, because the pace of any Star Trek show is not to overwhelm the viewer, just kind of let you digest what you're seeing. This was just wanted to shove everything at you at once, it seemed like.
The Klingons look like something out of Dune. Or like I said, Stargate. Looks like they're wearing Stargate dresses. It looks like they're wearing dresses, that's for sure.
Or like Farscape or Babylon 5 or
something
whatever.
like that, yeah. They look very regal, but they're just not nearly what I picture a Klingon remotely wearing or looking like. Even in that scene where they have all the houses sitting there talking to them, like I said, if you'd at least made them all look a little different, I would have accepted it more. But they all look the same pretty much. They all pretty much have the same similar designs. So it's like, you had the opportunity here to go, there are the other Klingons out there that look like the ones we know in TNG, look like the ones we remember from the original series and so on. Instead, all the Klingons are the same, so they waste that opportunity, and we're left with what is basically a generic, dumbed-down version of JJ's 09 Star Trek. A very well-made fan film, more or less.
It comes across as a poorly acted but really high-budgeted fan film. It really does.
Yeah, I agree completely that it's really over-designed. But the worst thing is that it's not really Star Trek. Because if we compare it to the Kelvin movies, then that was also over-designed compared to the original series. But in my opinion, it still retained that Star Trek look and overall Star Trek aesthetics, which this series is completely missing, more or less. Now, if you recall the earlier coverage here on Midnight's Edge, we've been going through a lot of rumors about the behind-the-scenes trouble, and a lot of that trouble, in fact most of it, boils down to disagreements over the designs. That is apparently the reason why you still can't find any toys in the stores. Yeah, I know there's some licensing, you have some mugs, and you have some t-shirts, and you have some comics, and that was always going to be the case. But you still don't have any toy lines in stores. And that apparently is because they know what the built-in Star Trek fans who do buy toys prefer. And this isn't it. And I can kind of see why, because to me, these designs aren't Star Trek. As you said, I would accept this as a Dune reboot, or a Battlestar Galactica, or that video game, whatever everyone is comparing it to.
Mass Effect.
That's the one. But not Star Trek.
You made a really good point. The Kelvin movies were already one step beyond what the original show was. It was already exaggerated. So now then, this is almost like an exaggeration on top of that. So just like a copy of a copy of a copy, it's getting more and more diluted. No matter how fancy you make it look, it's still diluted.
And as it gets more diluted, it gets more and more generic. Because this was pretty good looking generic sci-fi, and I'd be more excited if this was a generic sci-fi show. But it claims to be Star Trek, and that gives me some trepidations. Moving on from the visuals, Star Trek is at the core about the characters. So what did you think about the characters and the acting?
Well, we already got into it a little bit, but obviously Doug Jones's character was the one that stood out the most. Sonequa Martin stood out as the worst actor in the bunch. The rest are very throwaway. They don't really get any setup whatsoever. Not to keep bringing it in, but look at an example of the Orville. Granted, the first episode is the least episode so far of all these, but that episode also set up so many of those characters to where we know who all the main characters are by the end of that show. And from here on out, if they have an episode that surrounds them, much like the last episode did, we already know who that character is and what they're all about. In this instance, we have all these characters that were flashed on the screen, and with everything going on, we don't get to know any of them. Really. Doug Jones's character and Michael is the only two characters we really get to know at all.
All the characters just seem so generic. I didn't make a connection with really any of them. They tried to make Sonequa Martin Green's character, Michael Burnham, interesting, and they tried to make you connect with her. It was just completely flat. She was just uninteresting. They all have character traits, but there's no real characters here, which is kind of a weird way to say. I'm like, Doug Jones's character is kind of interesting.
Well, and we already know this is not the crew that we're really going to have going forward much anyway. So that's another thing.
Yeah, no, because most are dead.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, most of them are out in space, dead. So it all seemed very ham-fisted. And yes, like I said, Doug Jones was the one I liked the most. But that's not saying much. Because like Rob pointed out, they're just trying to pull on that sympathy chord. The makeup is amazing. Doug Jones already knows how to play these kind of characters. So he felt like he was right at home. Everybody else felt like they were completely out of their element. Even Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah.
She was okay, but we've seen this character how many times before? This was Pike 2.0.
And she didn't really have a character. If we were to do the red letter media test, like describe her without describing what she looks like, you'll have a very hard time doing that. And for this, I blame the writers. Because let's make a distinction here between the actors the characters and the writers. Because yeah, I had issues with Michael Burnham and most of the others as well, but that's not the fault of any of the individual actors. Sonequa Martin-Green has gotten loads of praise, which I'm not entirely sure that she deserves. But that's neither here nor there, because she does the best as she can with a horrendous script that is given to her, same as everyone else. Like, my first issue came within the first couple of minutes when they are in the desert, and she gives her estimate of when a storm is coming, right down to the second. Lady, you are not a Vulcan. You do not have that mental capability. You can try to act like a Vulcan, you can try to mimic one and act as self-assured as one, but you don't have that mental capacity. And sure enough, her estimate was completely wrong, and the storm came much, much earlier. And she even said, whoa, that came earlier than I thought. Well, then why did you think down to the fucking second? And that's just like one of many, many examples,
Right.
like how quickly she stages a mutiny.
I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about Michael, because she makes every fucking stupid decision in the entire show that anybody could make. And she's the reason everybody gets killed, really, if you boil it down, because every decision she made from the first moment causes the entire issue. And yes, granted, the Klingons are out for blood, and they played that up quite a bit. But at the same time, if she would have just listened and done a lot of what she was supposed to do in the first place, as a normal, like, leader would, or at least took that role on more, I could actually see her taking on the leader role. I don't see her as a leader, unless they make some major shift in her character. Like Andre pointed out, constantly acting like she's a Vulcan, and that may be part of her character going forward, but she has no common sense whatsoever. And just in the simple terms of a Vulcan, she's completely illogical in everything she does, because there's no way that Spock would do any of the things that she did.
Even taking the spacewalk is the first thing, when you can send out a probe to investigate, right? I mean, send back information.
Unless, of course, we are talking about J.J. Abrams' book, who happily volunteered into the volcano. But again, this claims to be Prime and not Kelvin's book. So yeah, there's that.
And that's why I keep bringing him up in comparison, because she was obviously raised and trained and taught by the same exact people that Spock was. And there's no way Spock would do any of this shit, including, like you said, the spacewalk. He'd send a probe. He would never do a mutiny. All of it is very uncharacteristic of what Spock would do, and she has none of his sensibilities or common sense, and everything she does is illogical. So they make it very hard to like this character, so I feel sorry for Sonequa Martin-Green, but the writers really fucked up here.
No, because the way I see it is this, that she actually does have some characteristics of Spock and of Sarek, and that is to be sure of themselves and to be sure of their own estimates and appraisals of the situation. Problem is that she doesn't have the brain power that goes along with that attitude. And so she can jump to a conclusion and be completely sure of it, just like everyone else has been around her while she was being raised. Problem is that she lacks the ability to think 2 steps ahead. She can see that, oh, okay, Klingons, we need to make them respect us, so we need to attack. And yeah, that's fine. And Spock would probably reach the same conclusion. But he would also think 2 steps ahead. He would think that, okay, if the captain doesn't agree and I stage a mutiny, that's probably not going to end well. No shots will probably be fired and I will be sent to the brig. So I have to find another solution. Burnham did not think that far. She just went to the first idea that came to her head with no thought of any consequences whatsoever. Again, she's a poor mentat, to use some Dune terminology, and she's an even poorer Vulcan.
There's a saying, actually, you said she's the only thing that she has in common with Spock is she's sure of herself. There's I don't know if, how well this translates into Norwegian, but if there's one person that nobody can stand, it's the guy who thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. And from that aspect, they make Michael Burnham a very difficult character to like.
God damn it, that's why nobody likes me. No, and I totally get what you're saying. That's kind of where I was getting to. And
yeah.
And Andre, I stand corrected. You're right about that. She's way too sure of herself, and she has way too much self-confidence like a Vulcan would. But like you said, she just lacks that real common sense.
She reminds me, in fact, of another character. A character that I think is very obscure, not outside of Norway, where he is completely unknown, but outside of the United Kingdom. And that would be Mr. Britas of the Britas Empire. played by Chris Barry of Red Dwarf fame. Now, he's basically the operator of a health center who is completely sure of himself and his own superiority, despite being a complete and total smeghead and a git and incompetent who fails at everything. But he manages to fail upwards, and this seems to be the same thing here, because here she has like loads of support because of Sarek and everything, and basically she's the embodiment of you can do anything as long as you have the right daddy.
The one thing that confuses me is, since when are Vulcans like Jedis and can communicate across the galaxy via mind or Katra or whatever?
I thank you for bringing that up, because that pulled me out of the show completely, because that's one of the worst Deus Ex Machinas I've ever seen in any Star Trek. I hope that it was a dream sequence. We can have the excuse that she just dreamt that Sarek is there, because if he suddenly has the moment to take his Katra, is that what it's called, out of himself and into her when he's still alive, and use it to communicate across the universe when she suddenly needs it. Yeah, no, thank you. That's I'm tuning out there.
You call bullshit on that.
Yeah. I don't even call bullshit. I just give up.
And at first I did think it was a dream sequence until he's like doing the whole, thing. It's very trying on me, or however he puts it. It's like, what the fuck is this?
Somebody will say to you, well, it's a fictional character. You could do whatever you want with it. I'm like, yeah, up until a point, you can do whatever you want to it.
He's Sarek, though, not Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Exactly. Exactly. Up until a point, you could do it. Like, This was that point. This was the line right here. I'm like, at some point it stops working. I'm like, and we found that line where it stopped working.
But let's go back to what worked, because I'd like to talk a little bit about Saru as well, because both of you have praised the character and Doug Jones' performance of him, and I agree. That was the one compelling character. Not just the way he looked, but like the sort of alienish body of Doug Jones was perfect for the character. I was just disappointed that we didn't get to see his hooves in this episode, because he does have hooves, and that's why he had this weird walk. But what I thought was particularly intriguing about him, which is something new, where I will give the writers a little bit of credit actually, is that this guy is, for lack of a better word, a coward. Someone who is conflict averse and who just wants to run away and escape and get back up. Like when I was looking at him, I was thinking, whoa, this guy is a space bunny. And to like make that comparison, a bunny is basically today's special of the nature kitchen. It's the perfect prey animal. Like, it's a vegetarian that only eats carrots, but any carnivore in the surrounding of a bunny or a rabbit is going to have that for dinner. And so they have evolved to be afraid of everything and to have like these eyes in the middle of their heads so that they have 360-degree field of vision. And I was like thinking that when he said that my species has been hunted and preyed upon by everyone else on the planet, just like a bunny. And for that reason, they have been bred to sense the coming of death, which I think is bullshit. I think that just means that they're afraid of everything. But that kind of worked for the character.
It was a unique character in Star Trek, yeah.
Yeah, that's like a new twist for something in Star Trek, where everyone is brave and selfless, and here you have someone who is more like Judge Wimpy and Judge Dredd. Basically, we surrender. We must give up to their demands right away.
But also not to be the comic relief at the same time as well.
Exactly. So he was like the one character that really worked. Another intriguing character was the great Klingon unifier, T'Kuvma, essentially the ersatz Donald Trump of the show, who wanted to make Kronos great again. What did you think about him?
The premise is interesting, that a guy within the Klingon Empire wants to unite all the great houses, but at the same time, the whole thing with the Klingon language and him stumbling through it just dragged the whole thing down.
Right. Well, not only that, like most of his scenes, like the 5 or 6 scenes, could have all been put into like 2 scenes, really.
Yeah.
And quickly, gotten through. We know what he's after. We know what he wants. We don't need 6 scenes to explain that.
Yeah, they belabored the point really quite a bit with him.
Well, I have to disagree with you then, because I actually liked how they portrayed him. Designs aside, I thought it was a pretty good move to have them all speak Klingon all the time and have it subtitled, because not everyone in the universe speaks English. So that was clever, and I also liked basically how he was set up to become a new messiah-like figure, a unifier. And ironically, Michael Burnham gave him the greatest gift she could ever give him. Because not only did she kill him and make him a martyr, after they had already defeated the Federation in that battle, which will go down in Klingon history. Not only that, the captain of the Shinsu was found dead at the scene. So now you not only have the legend that he died in battle, he died in battle taking a Federation captain with him, thereby really solidifying his place not only in legend, but in Sto-vo-kor, the Klingon Valhalla.
Yeah, I can see your point about that, but it was just getting there that I had a problem with.
I mean, if he didn't come off as such a Saturday morning cartoon villain most of the time, I wouldn't have had such an issue, maybe. But yeah.
Swap out Cobra Commander, and we have the same story.
Let's dig a little bit more into the story, because I thought it was relatively thin. What did you think about the story and the writing?
Everybody's written like an idiot, and it seems like they wrote the story over the special effect shots. How can we work this shot into the story? Oh, I know, we'll do this. So it almost seems like they were writing everything backwards, which is a common technique a lot of writers have. They work backwards, but in a situation like this, like I said, none of the characters acted like real people, and they made a lot of really dumb decisions, and you just wondered, how did any of this make it into the shooting script?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all that. And to me, some of the worst writing was the Klingon commander, because, I mean, he didn't need to be so villainous. Like, we already understood his plight. Yeah, Michael killed one of their torchbearers, so he's already got more than enough reason to go to war with the Federation. All that diplomacy shit back and forth, just to make him look even more villainous, to me, was just kind of redundant. Because if they would have left it at that, it's like, okay, they don't need any diplomacy. That's the kind of people they are. You killed one of ours, it's on. Period. You know, and then at the same time you had, you know, Michelle Yeoh's character say straight out, you guys are in Federation territory, by the way. She gave him a warning or whatever, and at that point, that's when the battle should have started, and without any diplomacy whatsoever, because to me, it just made them look weak in a sense that they're just being villainous to be villainous, and Klingons don't normally do that. I don't think they would go to that extreme. Am I wrong, or do you guys agree with that in a sense, how you view Klingons as far as the characters usually are?
No, actually, I don't think that was too far off base, because basically you saw they ventured into Federation space, and then they fired on a Federation relay array, and that's all fine. That's all very Klingon behavior, right up until the point where they sat in waiting for the Federation ship to arrive, and then they were obviously going to attack it sooner or later, but they waited for someone to come there. That's like the one thing that was maybe out of character, because you'd think that, unless of course they waited for the excuse to drum up more support from the other Klingon houses. Of course, that's a strategy that
in
we
a
could
way,
have employed.
yeah.
That let's go there, let's draw them out, let's have them attack us, or make it appear as if we are defending ourselves, so all the others will come to our aid for the noble cause of defending a fellow Klingon who is under attack from Federation, rather than us going into their territory and looking for trouble. So yeah, I can see why that is not a huge issue. I don't have a huge issue with that, to be honest.
Well, I did, because like you just said, he was already had enough to get enough support the moment that she killed a torchbearer. Why did he continue to just march on and, like you said, and then wait and do all this stuff? All that stuff could have been taken care of earlier on, to where he had more than enough reason to go after the Federation because of all this, you know, the stuff that had happened prior to, even though they had shot at what was it, a satellite or whatever, you know, and all that, like kind of
communications relay or something.
Yeah. And that's one of those things where, like you said, it was basically bait to pull him out. Well, that's where in any other Star Trek show, it would be which basically it kind of was, the spaceship that's going to get destroyed, and we don't get to know them very well. So, whatever the closest ship is, which is always our hero ship, has to go and deal with it. Well, under normal circumstances, the way Klingons are normally portrayed, they wouldn't have gone to those extremes. I'm not saying that they're not a little nefarious at times, but it felt, like I said, very cartoon villain to me after that point. Every move that was made by the Klingon leader after their first skirmish, everything from that point after that just didn't feel like very Klingon to me.
Yeah, it seemed like you could swap out any Saturday morning villain you want and with this Klingon commander, and it wouldn't make a difference. The motivations were exactly the same. I almost expected him to be twirling his mustache. Here, I'll get you, Federation. It
felt a little overkill, yeah.
Yeah.
In that sense, I absolutely agree. These guys, they didn't look like Klingons. They didn't act all that much like Klingons. So why not make them a completely new alien breed and get away from the whole controversy about the new designs? But beyond that, there was another choice that they did story-wise that I thought was really weird. As you may recall from earlier Midnight's Edge videos, we've covered how Discovery in reality has 2 pilots. This is the first one, which ends on sort of a cliffhanger, and then it's the next pilot, which is going to end with Burnham being on the crew of the Starship Discovery, captained by Jason Isaacs. But the choice that I think is pretty weird is that here, for this first pilot, for lack of a better term, it's a fairly self-contained story. This cliffhanger ending of her being sent to jail forever. Where's the cliffhanger? I thought that was a perfectly fine ending for the story that we saw. That was a nice ending for a nice self-contained story. Incompetent officer fucks up royally, gets ship destroyed, captain killed, starts war with the Klingons, gets sent to jail. The end. So if you didn't like it, then why would you want to go to CBS All Access to check the rest? There's no real cliffhanger. Everyone we saw is dead. Klingons are happy, Federation is okay, it's just the Shinsu is no more, and Burnham is behind bars. And there's no reason to watch beyond this point, is what I'm thinking, because nothing else is set up. There's no exciting storylines to be concluded. What do you think about that?
This was originally one self-contained pilot, and they split it up on purpose just so people would go to CBS All Access and sign up to see the last half. And originally the plan was, as covered by Midnight's Edge, if I'm not mistaken, was to be shown as one pilot.
Like I said, the ending of the first part on that was shown on CBS proper was almost too jarring. Yeah, I understand they wanted a cliffhanger, but at the same time, it felt like there was this entire story, and then they just cut it here. I mean, it didn't feel like it was organically written as 2 parts. And as you said, I mean, this really did feel like a self-contained episode of maybe a different series. That you have the story about this one officer. She starts interstellar war with an alien race, and she gets sentenced to life in prison. They shut the door behind her, clang, and that's it. I mean, and she's never heard from again. She becomes a footnote in the history of the Federation or whatever.
And that would explain why we never heard about Spock's adopted sister.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
But we know this is not it. We know that.
But at the same time, I mean, like I said, I mean, where is really the compelling reason to follow this character if she's been thrown into the Federation prison?
Well, they want us to see how she gets out, but we're not really invested in her. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I honestly don't care if or how she gets out of prison. I'm perfectly happy letting her rot there and let her be the shame in the House of Sarek that they never talk about again.
Did you have a sister? Yeah, we don't talk about her.
No, she died, would be Sarek's response. So.
The who what now?
I have no daughter.
Yeah, but just to stress that's not a slight against Sonequa Martin Breen, who did the best she could with the writing she had delivered. So it's a slight against the writers. So clearly, we here at Midnight's Edge had some issues with Star Trek Discovery. Now, if we look at reviews from elsewhere, as per Rotten Tomatoes, where it at the time of this recording sits at 88%, it would appear that most critics tended to enjoy Star Trek Discovery. Guys, do you have any thoughts about that?
Nobody is going to be the critic that says this is bad. That's what I'm gathering. I've read a few reviews that said some negative things, but they stopped short of calling it bad, because, and I hate to say that there's an agenda at play here, but nobody wants to bear the brunt of the whole backlash that's going to be coming if you give this a bad review, because of the politics that have been surrounding this show and the cast and the whole thing and the climate we live in, and that's a mixed blessing, because if this show's successful, it means we'll probably get more Star Trek, but we're gonna get more bad Star Trek.
Feels just like Ghostbusters and a few other things that we've dealt with in the past with similar situations, to where, like you said, nobody wants to be that critic to be the one to say it was bad. There are a few out there, very few, but most don't want to be that one, especially in the climate surrounding it. And it feels very Ghostbusters. Online, I'm getting a very mixed reaction. And it seems very similar to Ghostbusters, to where it's either straight across hate, or it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but there's that but. Just like Rob said. Everybody stops at saying it's bad, but there's a but to it, and there's always something, whether it just didn't feel like Star Trek to me, or I'm not sure how this really syncs up with the previous Star Treks, as far as, this is supposed to be a prequel to the Prime timeline and all that kind of stuff. And I've heard there's a lot of confusion among the general audience, the non-Trekkies and Trekkers, the non-casual fans, those who are not real up on Star Trek. So this did pull in a lot of newer viewers, like CBS wanted it to, out of that 9.6 million that's been reported as of this recording that viewed the premiere on CBS Sunday night. The difference, though, is I'm getting a lot of feedback from people online that if you don't know much about Star Trek, you're completely lost and you don't understand really what's going on, because probably, going back to what Rob and we've all kind of said before, there was just way too much going on, and at the same time it was very poorly set up. And most Star Trek fans I've talked to are at least diehard and very big Star Trek fans, they don't like a lot of what happened and went down, the designs, the story, how characters have been changed, and the fact that they're trying to play this as a Prime show when everything is way too advanced, and so on. But do you think it was a success, being that there was 9.6 million viewers?
Well, in the short term, that of course is a success, because that's a very good number. But that's the short term, and the show isn't a success until it's renewed for season number 2. Now, if you've watched our earlier coverage, you'll know that they have been nervous within CBS, because they have been bombarded with fan skepticism and fan hate instead of fan excitement. So they are nervous about this and about what's going on. And what I've heard through the grapevine is that there are 2 criteria that's going to determine the future of Star Trek Discovery, if it's going to be renewed for a second season or if they're going to fall back on Plan B. And those 2 criteria are as follows. 1, it needs to have a huge audience on its premiere on CBS. Check, it did that. Number 2, though, and this is the most important thing, it needs to lead to a shitload of new subscribers on CBS All Access. Because keep in mind, the whole reason this series was greenlit wasn't because they decided that, oh, now it's time for a new Star Trek series. No, they wanted to make CBS All Access a hit. And Star Trek was used as a means to achieve that end. Unless Discovery pulls in the minimum projected subscribers, then it's not a hit. And we of course don't know how many subscribers they will see as the minimum required. The number that has been thrown around in the media is 4 million. I've heard that internally it might be 8 million. That sounds a little bit high to me, but that's the word on the grapevine. And of course others claim that they might reduce the expectations down to 1 million new subscribers. Of course, we're not going to find out exactly how many subscribers there will be, because that's numbers that they keep to their chest. But we do have some indications so far, don't we, Tom?
Yeah, there was a story floating around on several outlets like Deadline Hollywood saying that CBS All Access had a record number of single-day signups for the digital streaming subscription service. No specific numbers were reported, though, but They're stating that it outdid their previous record, which was this year's Grammys back in February. And
nobody gives a shit about the Grammys.
Not to put it down, but seriously, that's not saying much.
It was supposed to be the biggest day ever. It would have been a huge failure if it wasn't. The only question is, like, by how massive a margin should it be the biggest day ever? That's the question. And was the margin big enough? That remains to be seen.
Okay, so basically what we're all boiling it down to here is that CBS is banking on this to be their success to drive CBS All Access. But what do we think they're going to need to do story-wise to not only make the show a success, but bring a lot of the original fans back in a lot of ways? Because I think I've seen a lot of people saying they're not going to subscribe to CBS All Access.
As far as my expectations, I have none because I'm out. That's it. I am not subscribing to CBS All Access. I've made my decision. These characters are not that interesting for me to invest any more time and certainly any money into. I just don't care. I'm sorry. This is a sacrilege for me to say because I've been enthusiastic and I've been excited about every Star Trek series since The Next Generation, every new iteration I've been looking forward to. I just don't care. That's it. I'm out. I'm done.
That was a perfect conclusion then. Burnham is locked up.
Yes, perfect. Clang, that's it. You shut the door on her.
Frankly, majority of us, or at least all of us here, just don't give a shit what happens to her. So that's kind of where it's at. They really got to make people give a shit. And I mean, I guess if enough people say, oh no, you're wrong, it got better, it gets better, blah, 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 maybe they'll be successful. That's what it's going to take, is they have to concentrate on the show itself story-wise and aesthetically, and not only bringing in new fans but also retaining the old fans, or at least turning them back around to the show.
Yeah, and I think that's going to depend a lot on the second pilot, the one that's going to set the direction for the remainder of the series, because that's where we're going to get to know the characters that we're going to be following for the rest of the series. And this is where I think that they made a mistake, because now they basically wasted 2 episodes setting up Michael Burnham's fall from grace. This is something that could have been set up in an intro sequence and alluded to in flashbacks, and then told the proper pilot, getting us introduced to the characters that we actually will be following for the rest of the series right out of the gate, instead of wasting 2 episodes in what basically boils down to a lead-in to the real series.
Right, and anybody who's ever known anything about writing, this is all stuff that should have been covered in the first act, not a first show.
Yeah, so like the ideal intro would be that you see the Shinzu being destroyed through her actions, and then she wakes up after having a nightmare in a Federation prison.
Yeah, after the first break.
Or better yet, you could do it Tom Paris, already fallen from grace. And then the story of how she fell from grace, or he fell from grace, is only told later. That was the perfect way of doing it, because that's where we are right now. Basically, Michael Burnham is Tom Paris, but they handled that so much better in Voyager than at least it looks like they're going to handle it here, is my take on it. And they're not done wasting time yet, because indications are they're going to be a few episodes set in the mirrored universe, which I'm normally not against. But now they've already wasted 2 episodes, and these mirrored universe episodes, are they going to tie into a bigger storyline, or is the rest of the series just going to be like mini storylines? That I don't know yet, but that's going to be intriguing to see. And also the showrunners hinted at, be patient with us. This is all going to line up with canon and the Prime universe down the line. Now, if you recall from earlier Midnight's Edge videos, the very first one that we did on the Star Trek Revelations, we were talking about how the rumors were saying that the Prime timeline was going to be replaced with trans-dimensional universes, for lack of a better word. I think that is still coming down the line, and some universe-altering event is how they're going to try to tie it into the Prime universe, by basically making this into the Prime universe. Of course, it's never going to line up perfectly, because this is a reboot. What do you make about that?
God damn it, Barry. No, like you said, we reported on this. We've speculated on this before. We're left with the same questions we had originally. Is this mirror universe or is this multi-dimensional thing going to be what differentiates this into its own quote-unquote timeline? Because there's no way this is in prime timeline and there's not going to be able to convince me of that, or any other Star Trek fan for that matter.
Like you said, damn it, Barry, I think you're going to have a hard time cleaning up this mess. I really do. At this point, I don't see how they can make this line up with the prime timeline. This kind of reminds me of Marvel's Secret Empire, where the writers kept saying, no, please give us a chance. We promise this is going to be good. And then it just turned out to be the biggest pile of trash imaginable.
This basically then brings us to the final question about Discovery. Is this Star Trek?
No,
not at all. No. There's not enough here. Even though I'm, a casual to avid fan in comparison to you guys, no.
I'm going to say no, but it could have been. And that is what is so infuriating. I still stand by what I've said earlier, that if they were going to make a prequel in the prime timeline, then they have to make it line up. Then they should have looked at what the Axanar was doing. Hell, they should have hired Alec Peters and the people who did the Axanar, who showed them how this can and should be done and made to be look good. If they were going to set something in this time frame, then they were forced to go in that visual direction with some locked storylines in both ends. Then they have to abolish all reboot ideas. It has to line up. If they are not willing to go for those restrictions, then they shouldn't have gone back to that period of the prime timeline. Then the post-Nemesis era is there waiting to be charted out. They could have used these designs. They could have used this basic story with someone other than the Klingons. They could have done anything. They could have made it the Romulans instead, a fractioned Romulan empire, scattered all around in different houses after the destruction of the Romulan home world. They could have done that. They could have done anything if they had just gone post-Voyager and post-Nemesis. Anything would have been okay. What screwed them over was the hopeless decision of making another prequel set in the time without lining it up. That precludes this from being Star Trek in my eyes. But now, luckily, we have another Star Trek, and that is the Orville. Guys, we have now seen 3 episodes of the Orville. We've talked about the first episode here at Midnight's Edge, and we've talked about episodes 2 and 3 on Midnight's Edge After Dark. So if you haven't seen that, then go check it out. But now that we actually have seen Star Trek Discovery, what do you now feel about the first 3 episodes of the Orville?
Orville is more like what Star Trek should be. And if they had their shit together on Discovery, we wouldn't even be talking about Orville. But Orville managed to capture not only the spirit of Star Trek, but it's also hopelessly devoted to Star Trek, and in which case it has the heart and soul of Star Trek. Discovery does not. That's all I can say on that.
Hard to add anything more significant to those comments. I mean, the Orville is what we really wanted in the Star Trek series. And with each week, it just keeps showing that there are people who love Star Trek and are dedicated to Star Trek and that want to carry on in the spirit of Star Trek. The love for the series really shows through in the Orville. And now that we've seen Discovery, it's difficult to see any real kind of love for the series and for the material in Discovery. And rather, I see more almost contempt for it. Kind of like when hero movies were being made in the 90s, they actively ran away from them. And they didn't embrace the very qualities that you wanted them to. That's what the Orville does. They run towards those things that you love about a Star Trek, where Discovery runs away from them.
Yeah, I agree completely. The Orville is Star Trek. As you may recall, I wasn't too sold on the first episode of the Orville. I thought it was pretty lackluster and I didn't think the humor worked. The second episode, that was more like it. Then we were starting getting into some more Star Trek-like themes of the growth of this young, inexperienced officer suddenly thrown into command, having to learn humility, having to learn to listen to advice, having to learn to lead others. These are all very good life lessons that anyone working within business or in any kind of managerial position are going to recognize. Furthermore, that growth is Star Trek. And then of course you have like the alien aspect with the menagerie and the social commentary towards the end with the reality TV and everything. Plus some Seth MacFarlane humor in it all. So pretty spot on. And the third episode, wow, that's pure Star Trek right there. And notice how there you are really exploring the characters, and we're getting to know the characters in the exact same way that we have gotten to know the characters in past Star Trek series. And maybe they'll do that in Discovery as well down the line, but they've now wasted 2 episodes, and there's now going to be a third pilot. So they've wasted even more episodes before they can start to reach the same level that the Orville is already at. But thematically, visually, story-wise, so far, based on what we have seen, 2 episodes into Discovery and 3 episodes into the Orville is the Star Trek series, and Discovery is the generic science fiction.
I think that's the best way to sum this entire conversation up right there until we reconvene again on the subject. So Rob, why don't you take us out?
We'd like to thank everyone here for joining us for this special Star Trek Discovery Roundtable right here on the main channel, and we will be covering more happenings in the world of Star Trek Discovery, and we will be reviewing future episodes as well. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and make sure you click the bell icon to be alerted when all the latest new content is uploaded, including our upcoming Star Trek Discovery videos that we'll be having in the near future. And if you are a Star Trek fan, you might want to check out the Redshirt podcast I was just on recently, and we will be doing a special Star Trek Discovery episode with myself and Mr. Tom Connors coming up in the very near future here. So please check out their podcast and please subscribe to them. And they're very cool guys. They're very informative, and they love Star Trek just as much as we do, probably even more so. So check them out at the Redshirts on iTunes. We also like to remind you that if you enjoy the channel, to please consider supporting the channel through Patreon. Your support through Patreon helps us make the show better by investing in equipment and software to edit the show. And as a patron, you will get exclusive bonus content, such as the Behind the Edge making of documentaries. You will get early access to mini documentaries. You'll get exclusive audio clips. You will even get some outtakes from certain episodes that never made it onto the main channel. So there's a lot of good stuff there. And as always, we'd like to thank you for joining us here at Midnight's Edge for this special roundtable. We'd like to thank Mr. Tom Connors.
Thank you.
And our Master of Ceremonies, Andre.
Cheers.
And I am your Narrator Supreme, Rob Robot Shlomo, and we will catch you next time.